Good evening. Before I even begin, I just want to thank all of you, not only for being here, but for all the work you did all day. You really did a wonderful job, and you should give yourselves a hand, because I will. I'm sure we all remember the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, as told in John chapter 4. In verse 10, Jesus said, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." It is this living water from Jesus which grants eternal life. It is this living water that flowed through our forefathers when they established Himmel's church. It is this living water which still flows today. The contemporary poet Maya Angelou states that we all live downstream. It is those who came before us, those who have lived upstream of us, who have influenced our very being. Would you please close your eyes for just a moment and think about those who have lived upstream of you, those who have influenced your beliefs? Maybe it was your parents, grandparents, pastor, neighbor, spouse, or good friend. Now let me invite you on a journey upstream. Let's go back to 1964. Lyndon B. Johnson was president following the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Martin Luther King Jr. won the Nobel Peace Prize for leading nonviolent civil rights demonstrations. The Vietnam War was being fought. One of the popular movie stars was a man named Ronald Reagan. Reverend Paul W. Billow was a Lutheran pastor at Himmel's, and Reverend Jacob M. Singer was serving Himmel's Reformed congregation in the current church building, which was just 4 years old. A man named Omer Westendorf, under the pseudonym J. Clifford Evans, wrote the hymn, Sent Forth by God's Blessing, which serves as an inspiration to take the message of the living water with us into our daily lives. Please join in the singing of verses 1 and 2 of Sent Forth by God's Blessing. It's found on page 664 in the hymnal. Let's swim upstream to 1930. Herbert Hoover was the president. Vaudeville shows and Bing Crosby were popular diversions from thinking about the difficulties people were facing during the Great Depression. Reverend W.H. Klein got at the Lutheran congregation, and Reverend E.S. Knoll got at the Reformed congregation in the Frame Church here at Himmel's. Harry Emerson Fosdick, pastor of Riverside Church in New York City, wrote God of Grace, God of Glory, to be sung at the opening of the interdenominational Riverside Church. Let's sing verses 1 and 4 of that song right now, which is found on page 577 in the hymnal. God of Grace and God of Glory. We continue our journey in 1907. Teddy Roosevelt was president. Robert Baden-Powell of Boston started the Boy Scout movement. Gene Autry was born. Himmel's pastors were Reverend D.M. Stetler for the Lutheran congregation and Reverend James Blatt for the Reformed congregation. The frame church was 3 years old. Henry Van Dyke added the lyrics for Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee to Beethoven's music. Let's sing verses 1 and 4 of Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee, which can be found on page 89 of the hymnal. Before we continue our journey upstream, let's pause for another minute to reflect on the many people who have strived to help keep the message of the living water flowing. People like Reverend John C. Schmidt and Reverend Jared Fritzinger, pastors who in 1864 led worship services in Himmel's Stone Church. 1864. Abraham Lincoln was president. A new kind of church music, the gospel song, began to become popular. Gospel songs were more personal and lively expressions of faith than the usual hymn. Dr. Robert Lowry, a Baptist minister from Brooklyn, paid a visit to Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. He became so inspired while on the banks of the Susquehanna River that he wrote, "Shall We Gather by the River?" He thought that many hymns were written about the river of death, so he chose to write about the waters of life. Please join in singing verses 1, 2, and 4 of Shall We Gather by the River. It's found on page 723 of the hymnal. A little farther upstream, in 1862, we find that Abraham Lincoln is still president. Reverend Jared Fritzinger is still the Reformed pastor at Himmel Stone Church, but Reverend John Hascarl serves the Lutheran congregation. Joseph Henry Gilmore wrote "He Leadeth Me," based on Psalm 23. Let's sing verses 1 and 3 together. It's found on page 128 of the hymnal. The next step in our journey finds us in 1831. Andrew Jackson is president. Nate Turner led a very violent slave revolt in which about 60 men were killed. At Himmel Stone Church, Reverend John H. Hempling, Lutheran pastor, and Reverend Benjamin Boyer, Reformed pastor, might have been leading their congregations in the singing of Ray Palmer's "My Faith Looks Up to Thee," which had recently been published in Thomas Hastings and Lowell Mason's Spiritual Songs for Social Worship. It's found on page 452 in our hymnal. Could we sing verses 1 and 2, please? It's 1800. John Adams is the president. Only the second one in this young country called the United States. The Industrial Revolution is just beginning to appear in North America. The United States capital has moved to Washington, D.C. Himmel's log church, under the pastorate of Reverend Henry Moeller and Reverend Jonathan Rauhauser, is already 37 years old. Timothy Dwight, under whose presidency Yale College grew to great renown, was writing the hymn, "I Love Thy Kingdom, Lord." It's found on page 540. Let's sing all 5 verses together, page 540. The last stop on our journey takes us back to our roots, to the earliest days of Himmel's church, to the days when the dream of building the log church became a reality, to the days when the importance of spreading the news of the living water and keeping that water flowing for future generations was an exciting, urgent task. Those founding fathers probably could have been heard singing "The Little Brown Church in the Vale." Please think of them, the hardships that they must have endured so that the water could continue to flow into the Himmel's church and into us today as we sing together this old favorite as printed in the program insert. Please sing both verses with me. I hope you've enjoyed our journey upstream. Before I invite you to visit with some of the folks from Himmel's past, I'd like to challenge you. I'd like to challenge you to keep the living waters flowing for those who are downstream from us, our children, grandchildren, and future generations. Who knows, maybe someday, someone like my son, or Christopher Starr, or Nicole Hicks, or their children or their grandchildren, some of them, someday may take a look upstream to the year 1997, as the year Himmel's congregation installed the new pipe organ, and the 225th anniversary as a milestone in the 300, 350, who knows how many years that Himmel's will go on and serve as a vessel for the living water. Now continue your journey as your guide escorts you on a visit with some of the people from your past at the church cemetery. Thank you.
This is Himmel's Church Cemetery Walk, May 16, 1998. This is to celebrate Himmel's Church 225th anniversary.
My name is Johann Nicholas Schneider. I was born September 10, 1749 in Bethel Township, Lancaster County, and baptized 7 days later by the Reverend John Castor Silver. My parents were George Daniel and Magdalena Stump Schneider. My father was born sometime in 1721 and christened in the Lutheran Church in Herrenschulsbach, Rhineland, Germany. My grandparents were Johann Abraham and Anna Katharina Simon Schneider. After my grandfather passed on, my grandmother remarried my grandmother Anna Katrina married Johann George Brocius in 1724, and they lived in Herrenschulsbach for the next 16 years. They arrived in Philadelphia aboard the ship Lydia on September 20th, 1740, with 4 Schneider children and 3 children with the name Brocius. Now, getting back to my parents, they were members of the Atolia Lutheran Church in Raresburg, Berks County. Atolia is an Indian name for part of an area in the Tulpehocken Township in Berks County and Bethel Township in Lebanon County, where my father lived. My father received a lot in the northwest corner of Richard Penn's Manor, and during the Indian excursions of 1755 to 1763, the local settlers were forced to stay in our home as well as Fort Henry because of the Indians. We lived in the south side of the Blue Mountain near 501, which is across the mountain from Pine Grove. On June 29th, in 1773, in the Christ Lutheran Church in Stocksburg, I married Anna Maria Bordner, which happens to be 7 years younger than I, and she was first generation American Borden. On August 12th, 1776, I passed muster before the Committee of Observation and Inspection in Lancaster, and I joined the 3rd Company under the command of Thomas Kuppenhager, the 6th Battalion, under the command of Timothy Green of the Lancaster County, Pennsylvania Militia, as a private. At that time, Lancaster County extended to where we lived in Raresburg. For 6 months, I served in the Continental Army. My comrades and I were led on a march for a camp in New Jersey. After the war, I inherited a plantation in a tract of land containing 243 acres and moved here where I helped in the early work of organizing Himmel's Church. Anna Maria and I began clearing the land and farming. Anna Maria will tell you about our children. In 1818, my family and I assisted in the construction of the stone church, which replaced the old log building, which still happens to sit down at the bottom of the hill. My family and I loved to pass time by singing. We not only enjoyed the singing schools, but were members of the choir and here at Himmel. On October 28, 1821, after full life, I entered eternal rest at the age of 72. In 1827, a deed of partition was released, and each of our 10 surviving children received a portion of land. In 1995, my great-great-great-grandson, Marcus, provided me with this handsome bronze marker. And by the way, Johann Nicholas Schneider was my great-great-great-great-grandfather. Thank you.
My name is Anna Maria Bortner Schneider. I was born November 25th, 1756. My parents were Jacob and Sarah Balt Bortner. My father was born in 1720 in Oberhochstadt, Rheinland-Pfalz, Germany. My grandparents, Balthasar and Maria Elizabeth Bortner, arrived in Philadelphia on the ship Adventure in September 1732. In July 1746, my father voluntarily enlisted in a force of 400 men raised in the Pennsylvania colony to be employed with troops with other colonies and British regulars to invade Canada. And this is during the King George's War. After wintering near Albany, New York, the expedition was called off and the men were discharged in October 1747. After 1746, my father changed the spelling of his name to the more English pronunciation of Bortner. In 1750, Jacob married Sarah Balt in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. In April 1761, Jacob was naturalized as a British citizen by the Colonial Supreme Court in Philadelphia. In June 1761, when I was 4 years old, my father acquired land in Bethel Township, Berks County, by patent from the proprietors Richard and Thomas Penn. This farm straddles U.S. Route 22 northeast of the present village of Bethel, and at least part of this farm remained in the family until 1944. I was the oldest and only living daughter in a family of 7. I was baptized December 27, 1756 at Host Church near Appomattox Settlement. My oldest brother Jacob and youngest brother Daniel lived in Berks County. My brothers William, Peter, and John lived in Dauphin County and were members of Hoffman's Church near Gratz. My youngest sister Barbara died in Bethel Township. On June 29, 1773, I married Johann Nicholas Schneider, whom you have already met. Our first 6 children, 4 daughters and 2 sons, were born from 1774 to 1782 in Bethel Township. From 1784 to 1786, we lived near Jonestown in Lebanon County. 2 of our children, a son and a daughter, were born there. In 1788, we lived near Erdman, and 2 more sons were baptized at Plymouth Church. Anna Katerina was the first of our children, baptized here at Himmel. She was followed by 4 more boys, all baptized here at Himmel. I had 15 children in all. I have a list here if anybody would like to see that. The firstborn was in 1774 when I was 18 years old, and the last was born in 1802 when I was 46 years old. Can you imagine moving with a horse and a wagon over those mountains with such a family? I had at least 96 grandchildren, maybe more. I simply lost count. And I lived to see the beautiful stone church building, which was built in 1818. My sons helped to gather the stones and construct the building, and what a fine job they did. I understand they went on to hold offices in the congregation. What a wonderful legacy they left to you both. I entered eternal life at the age of 71, December 23rd, 1827.
And confused?
March 3rd, 1853. Brenneville and I attended services here at the Stone Church here at Himmel. I was the daughter of Peter and Anne Margarita Hepler Brocious. I had 2 brothers, Gottfried and Peter. One of my sisters, Marika, married Gottfried Reba. My other sister, Eve, married a son of the Reverend John Nicholas Hendricks. Upon the sudden death of my mother, Anna Margarita, my father then married her sister, Anna Maria Rice, making my aunt my stepmother. Anna Maria had been married to Jacob Rice, who died on September 26, 1838. My mother and stepmother were daughters of Caspar and Anna Maria Schmidt Hepler. My father, Peter, died at the age of 63 and is buried in the Zion Cemetary in Himmel. My mother and stepmother are buried here at Himmel. My brother Gottfried married a woman named Catherine Clark, and together they raised a family of 6 children. Long life, however, is not one of the Brocious family attributes, for Gottfried died at the early age of 43 on November 29, 1863. 1863. Catherine lived to be 71. My brother Peter lived all his life here near Greenbrier. He married a woman named Catherine Gonzer, and they raised a family of 8 children. He was very active in the community. He owned over 200 acres of land. He operated a mill, too. He operated an oil mill, sawmill, and grist mill here in Greenbrier. He, too, died a young man at the age of 43. His wife, Catherine, lived to be 85 years of age. Their son, Andrew G., then took over the milling business. He remodeled the mill, too, and continued with the oil mill and the sawmill. Andrew was very active in the community. He was a member of the Lutheran Church here at Himmel, where he held various offices. He was also served as the school director and the township supervisor. Andrew lived longer than many of the Brocious men before him. He died in the year of 1900 at the age of 68. Andrew's son, William S. Brocious, then took over the milling business after working in a coal mine in Locustdale and on the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad. He married Elizabeth Umlauf of Ashland, and together they had 11 children. Ownership of the mill was then taken over by his son Henry Brocious. That brings the history of the Greenbrier Mill up to the 1950s. You may be wondering why I call myself Anna Maria Brocious Holschuh Lawrence. The Benefields and I have a son named Jesse. Benefield died in 1853, when Jesse was only 2 years old. 12 years later, Jesse died on March 6, 1865. They had left me all alone. By that time, many settlers of the Schwab Creek Valley had moved west, or were thinking of doing so. There had been settlements made at Red Bank in Jefferson County. They'd even named the settlement North Freedom. I could not bear the sad memories here any longer, and the lure of the unknown intrigued me. I married a man named Lawrence, and together we moved west. I never came east again, that is until today. I hope you've enjoyed my visit as much as I have enjoyed reminiscing about my family here in Greenbrier.
My name is Dr. Frederick Trian. You may see the name spelled differently on some of the stones here in the cemetery. It was spelled T-R-I-O-N. It was also spelled T-R-Y-O-N. It was also spelled T-R-E-O-N. My grandfather and father came across from Europe, actually from a part of France, on this ship in 1752. I was born 10 years later. I was the third of 12 children. I became a doctor, and I settled in this area. I traveled to most of my patients on horseback, carrying my little medical bag here. My wife, Sarah Gogler, was also from this area. We were buried side by side here in the cemetery. We had 12 children. They included Michael, Benjamin, who I am directly descended from, Peter, Barbara, Julia, Susanna, Anne, Elizabeth, Sarah, Polly, and Frederick Jr., who also became a doctor. He probably attended medical school in the Philadelphia area, and he also became a doctor in this area and traveled as far as the Buffalo Valley over in the Snyder County and down into lower Mockinoy Township, down probably as far as Dalmatia, Malta area. Michael and Frederick Jr. are buried about 3 rows over that way along the walkway, and there were only 3 of them that remained here in this area. The rest all traveled to other parts of the country. That's all I have for you. You can now move on to the next station. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Louisa Christina Kaufman Beecher. I was born May 4th, 1843, to Daniel Hillman and Lucida Christ Kaufman. I was baptized here at this beautiful church, Himmel, on June 4th, 1843. My parents were my sponsors. I grew up in the surroundings of the beautiful Pennsylvania-style stone church with the balcony. How I remember the ministers preaching from the pigeon box pulpit, and how that organ built by Conrad Dysenbach echoed throughout the valley here. You know, Himmel's was called the organ church because of that beautiful instrument. Losing it in the fire almost 40 years ago must have been quite difficult. I'm so happy you were able to acquire a new pipe organ recently. I was confirmed here at the age of 15. Just after I turned 20, I married Henry Raker Beecher, after he returned from fighting for the Union Army. He had enlisted in May 1864, although he had an uncle in Philadelphia who tried to persuade Henry to stay home. Henry was born in Little Mockanoy Township, a son of Robert West and Lavina Raker Beecher. We set up housekeeping in Greenbrier. Well enough about me for now. Let me get on with my story. You will note that I am not actually buried here, but have come only briefly to tell you about the deaths of my brothers and sisters. It was just horrible for my parents and me. It actually began sometime in 1860. My twin brothers, Daniel and Henry, both died that year of typhoid fever. They were only 6 years old. Just before Christmas in 1861, my dear sister Mary, we called her Polly, got so terribly sick with the fever. Before we knew it, she died just 4 days before Christmas on December 21st. The poor soul was only 16 years old. We barely had the last shovel of dirt on her grave when my brother Nathan became ill. He was sick over Christmas and his condition worsened, so that by December 26th, he died also. Nathan was only 5, just a child. At the same time Nathan was sick, brother Elos took sick too. Elos was such a young, strong man. At age 26, all the young girls had their eye on him. He too succumbed to the typhoid fever and died the day after Nathan on December 27th. With Mary, Nathan, and Elos all gone within 6 days of each other, we thought, how could it get any worse? Well, it did. By the 29th, dear sister Matilda got fever too and died. She was 3 years older than Nathan, such a sweet young girl. We were glad to see the old year end and hoped 1862 would be better. By the 3rd day of January, we knew it would not. Brother William, who had shown signs of sickness when Matilda was sick, died also. Poor William. He did not make it to 10. His birthday would have been February 14th, Valentine's. Poor Mom and Dad. By now they just could not believe that 5 of their children were gone in a matter of days, and 7 in a matter of months. By the way, my sister Angelina died when I was 14, but the trauma was still not over. On January 9th, 1862, my second oldest brother Samuel, then 21, died of the fever. We hoped it had finally ended. Mother never really recovered from the shock. It is indeed a miracle that she did not get sick and die, for she was pregnant with my brother Charles while this was all going on. Charles was actually a godsend, for when he was born on March 7, 1862, he brought new life and hope to our family. Mother and father were able to regain some of their strength. Dad lived until 1877 and Mother until 1899. During the next 20 years, Henry and I lived in Greenbrier and began raising our family. In June of 1882, we moved to Virgil Cedar County, Missouri. Our twins, Felix Edwin and Robert West, were about 13 months old. Let me tell you, what a trip that was in a covered wagon. That's another story. I don't have time to tell you about that today, but maybe another time if you come back I will. By 1890, Henry and I moved to Kansas City, Missouri, where Henry had a butcher shop. I had a stroke of paralysis on February 22, 1904, and was bedfast for many years before I died in 1931. Henry was the last Civil War soldier living in Waverly. When Henry died, over 300 students and faculty paid their respects. Henry would visit the school each year and give the student body an address. In April of 1931, just before he died, he visited the school and presented a relief of marching soldiers he had been given to the annual Civil War encampment in Des Moines, Iowa, on the occasion of his 85th birthday. Henry and I were buried in Waverly, Lancaster County, Nebraska, where we lived with our daughter Ida until we died. By the way, my brother Charles grew up and married Emma Jane Furster. Their 5 children, Robert, Charles, Mabel, Judy, and Lee, are the great-grandparents of the Kaufmans who have ties to Himmel today.
Andreas Geist. That's about all the German I remember after so many years here and almost 150 years living in a grave. But my name is Andreas Geist, for those of you who don't understand German. And my ancestor was Andreas Geist. I was born in Frederick Township, Philadelphia County, on January 26, 1765. My parents were Christoph and Anna Margrethe Geist, who arrived in Philadelphia aboard the ship Lydia on September 27, 1740, which is the same ship that George Daniel Schneider and his mother, let's see if you can get this, Anna Katharina Simon Schneider Brocious arrived. Can anybody repeat that? Okay, my father was born in 1717 in Nuremberg, Germany, and traveled down the Rhine River to Rotterdam, Holland, and across the English Channel to Dover, England. When he arrived in Philadelphia, he had to sign oaths of allegiance to both the King of England and the province of Pennsylvania. He studied mineralogy, and he came to America to mine copper for the Perkiomen mining company. Upon his arrival, he moved to Frederick Township, Philadelphia County, which is now in Montgomery County, and he took charge of the mines along the Perkiomen Creek. The mining operation was never very successful because of the difficulty in extracting copper from New York, even though some was shipped back to England. My father bought a farm, and he died there as a result of a farming accident in 1766. He was laid to rest in the Faulkner Swamp Reformed Church Cemetary, which is in Montgomery County. My poor mother was left a widow at the age of 42, and she had 9 children ranging in age from newborn to 21. She moved north to Dryville, Berks County with all of my brothers and me. In 1777, I joined the Continental Army, and I served as a teamster in General Washington's Army at the Battle of Brandywine. For those of you who don't know, teamster is a person who is in charge of horses. So I brought my beaten and battered horse collar along. You know how those things are, though, after so many years. The American Patriots lost this battle despite the help of Marquis de Lafayette and Count Pulaski. So when it became evident that we were going to lose the battle, I cut loose the best horse and escaped capture from the British. During the harsh winter of 1777, my brothers Matthias and John and I were able to spend most of the time at our mother's home, which is about 15 miles from Valley Forge, where General Washington and the rest of the troops were staying. I bought my release from the Army, and I moved to Weisenberg Township, Northampton County, where I worked as a joiner and a farmer. In 1788, my first wife, whose maiden name was Dornmeyer, and my 2 children and I moved here to Northumberland County, traveling by Portland horseback. We traveled the Copenhagen Road across the Blue Mountains of Pine Grove, north to Ketters, and then to Roush Gap, and the Klingerstown Gap, where we entered Northumberland County. Then we traveled across Fisher's Ridge and settled in Greenbrier. We had heard that there were lots of greenbriers that we had to clear, and boy were there ever. But we got them cleared off, and we had some excellent farmland here along the Schwaben Creek, which is named after our tribe in Germany. Our first resting place was under a gigantic oak tree, not more than half a mile from the Indian hunting camp, which today is called Let Kill. At first it was a little scary, because the Indian cemetery was very close by, and it later became part of my farm. But my family and I became friends with the Indians, and we often watched them through the cracks in our log cabin. I do regret that I could never afford a tombstone for my first wife, who died shortly after we arrived here, and is buried to my right here. So, I married Maria Christina Schneider, daughter of Johann Nicholas Schneider, and the granddaughter of our good friend George Daniel Schneider, who had traveled with my father from the fatherland to America. Marie was born February 8, 1778 in Bethel Township in Berks County. All in all, I fathered 21 children, 17 of them survived to adulthood. I have a few pictures of them here, but I don't understand this. If I want to know what my children look like, I'll go look at them. But they said that some of you might want to look at them, so you can have a look at these. Here you understand these inventions. In 1795, I purchased nearly 300 acres of land from Adam Schlick and Henry Minium, and both of the lands had been patented by the pen. I had a lot of trouble getting clear titles because after the Revolution, the colony of Pennsylvania no longer existed. So finally, in 1800, I got a patent deed from Governor Thomas McKean, who was the second governor of Pennsylvania. The farm had been owned by my father-in-law, Johann Nicholas Schneider, and it's today located off Rattlesnake Road, where Marvin Federhoff has lived in recent times. 8 of my 17 children left the beautiful valley for Jesperson County between 1825 and 1850. Each of them decided to set out for themselves, and we wished them luck in the West. Our son Daniel left here when he was 16, and he returned to tell us of the magnificent white pine forest out there. And you can still see some of these white pines in the Cook State Forest in Jefferson County. I lived to see most of my children travel west. I died on December 19th, 1849 at the age of 94 years, 10 months, and 23 days. My second wife, Maria Christina, died September. My second wife, Maria Christina, died September 12th, 1859 at the age of 81. That's all I have to say.
My name is Reverend Johann George Christian Augustus Bertner. My tombstone is down here, but in order so everyone can hear each other, we decided to move this group up. As you can tell from maybe my accent and my Pennsylvania Dutch, as you would say, I am from Germany. I come from Schwarzburg, Rudestadt, and today is a very happy but sad day for me. It brought happy tears and sad tears. Brought sad tears because when I came back today, I found out that my wife lived to be 81 years old, and I died at the age of 54. So to me that was sad, but it also brought happy tears because I came back and I met so many of my relatives. On my way traveling throughout the morning, I had stopped at the post office and at Drumheller's, where I ran into a lot of my relatives. I had went down to where they're making the chicken barbecue, and if I may say, the buva hen squiddle gadu. How would you say that in English? The boys have done it again. My life, I was born in 1806. I got married at the age of 28. I married a lovely lady, Maria Feldstrop. We had 6 kids. Wonderful kids they were, but wouldn't all parents say that about their kids? We came to America in 1837. I was a school teacher, and I also studied religion. I became a Lutheran preacher here in America. I was like a traveling preacher. My area was what you would call the Lime Mountain Mockinoy area. There were 6 churches established during my time. They were St. Paul's over in Urban, which I think today's Reverend is George Heberling. It was a small congregation in 1855, about 40 people. Then there was a St. Paul's. It used to be the old Mockinoy schoolhouse. Then there's a St. Paul's in Sacramento. There's a St. Peter's down at the Red Cross area, which used to be a yellow wooden church. Now today it's a red brick church. Some may say I might even be a bricklayer because I laid one brick, the corner brick. Then there's a St. John's in Leck Hill, right before you get to the Snyder's Greenhouse. And there's a St. Matthew's in Dauphin County. I lived only a mile up the road here. You go up and you'll come to a right where it's called Schwallam's Road, I believe. Today, Lime Mountain High School principal Alex Minio lives there. Used to be an Eyster homestead. We had 6 kids: Louisa, Patrick, Francis, Amelia, Luther, Odelia, Odella. Odella married a Tobias Adams. Tobias Adams was the son of Nicholas and Elizabeth Schreffler. Odelia and Tobias had 7 kids, 2 sets of twins and 3 boys. They had a Flora, Rosa, Katie, Amelia, Francis, Henry, which happened to die at the age of 5, and Monroe. Monroe was the grandfather today, I found out, to a George and Pierce Adams. Some may know their kids, a Willie, Sean, and Tracy Adams. Flora married a Rufus Schwallam, a son of Fred Schwallam. Fred Schwallam has a son now by the name of Lynn Schwallam. Katie married a Levi Paul. There are a lot of the sons and daughters. I may not name all of them. These are just some I found out today. A Levi Paul was a Guy Paul. Adams Paul had some daughters, Ann and Florence Snyder. Also, I found out today that Katie was the grandmother to Miriam Drumheller. Amelia married a William Griffith. They now live in Allentown. The one who I found out the most information about today throughout my walking around was Rosa. Rosa married a Robert Schmeltz. We say Schmeltz, and now today you say Smeltz. I don't know what happened to the CH, but they had 6 kids. They had a Raymond Schmeltz, whose daughter is a Dorothy Erdman, who is a member of Himmel's church. They had a Jay Smeltz, a son by the name of Carl Smeltz. They had an Irene, is a daughter to Irene would be a Marby Schock. They had Gladys. Gladys had a son by the name of Richard Latchaw, but they call him Itch. They had Stella. Stella had a son by the name of Bobby Rebuck. Bobby Rebuck has a son by the name of Deanie Rebuck. The one who I may know the best or found the most information about is a Clarence Schmeltz. Clarence Schmeltz was baptized in 1916 under the name Schmeltz. Sometime from his time he was baptized to the time he was married, he married a young Nelma Schneider, which we say Schneider today. I take it you say Snyder. Married a Nelma Schneider. He was baptized as Schmeltz, but sometime between his baptismal and his marriage, his name became Smeltz. Nelma and Clarence Schmeltz, as I would say, had 2 kids, a Connie Lou and a Wilpert. Wilpert had 3 boys, a Kent, Kane, and Chris. And if I may say, I say the best out of all 3 was Chris. So, danke, auf Wiedersehen, mach's gut.
This is the tombstone of the next one right here, Peter Montpelier. Hello, my name is Peter Montelius. My twin brother Marcus and I were born March 8, 1791. Sponsors at our baptism were William Shoemaker and his wife Elizabeth. My twin brother Marcus died June 3, 1793. Our parents, Frederick Marcus and Elizabeth Christiani Bartholomew Montelius. My father was born October 25, 1752 in Upper Saxony, Germany. My mother was born January 7, 1854 in Dundelsheim, Germany. They came to America in September of 1773 and were married by the Reverend Michael Slaughter, the Reformed pastor, on October 8, 1777 in Philadelphia. Around 1780, they moved to Reamstown in Lancaster County. On April 14, 1805, I was confirmed
by Reverend Helmuth in Zion's Lutheran Church in Philadelphia. Family tradition has it that I was an indentured merchant to a merchant who ran a coffee shop in Philadelphia, and I learned the mercantile trade there. At the time, I was living with my grandparents in Philadelphia, and I received an education in printing and surveying. I returned to Reamstown and began teaching in the schools there. Later, that same merchant set up a business as a printer in Reamstown. And on January 26, 1812, I married my true love, Margaret Rebecca Steitzer. We were married by Reverend Henry Muhlenberg. She was a daughter of David and Elizabeth Mentz Steitzer, who resided in Loretto. During the course of our marriage, we were blessed with 12 children, 10 daughters and 2 sons. That's probably why you don't recognize my name. It disappeared as each of my daughters married local eligible young bachelors. Listen a minute and I'll tell you some of who they were. Elizabeth Christiana married John Snyder, and they lived in Leck Hill. Sarah married Daniel Fetter. Mary married George Snyder. Rachel married Nathan Erdman. Jane married John Schaefer. Fanny married B. Eister. Charlotte married Solomon Snyder. Harriet married Samuel Kiefer. Emma married Michael Hefner. And Frederica married Edward Starr. My son Timothy did not leave any sons in the valley, and Frederick moved to Snyder County in 1875. Before I came to Rebuck to be the school teacher, I taught about 20 years. I was at Reamstown from 1812 until we moved to East Buffalo Township in Union County in about 1824. My brother John and his family lived there. In the summer of 1830, my family and I moved here to Himmel. We had just settled in before our daughter Charlotte was born on December 1st. I started teaching in the November school term and taught the rest of my life in the original log schoolhouse built in 1774. I understand that house where the Weisers live today is the same building. I'd say, for those of you who don't know, that would be the house right, the section's house right down below here. That was the original schoolhouse. I'd say they're probably living in the oldest school building in the state. I taught many of the boys and some of the girls how to read and study the Bible, not only in German but also English. I made sure the boys knew how to cipher, reckon, and do elementary arithmetic. Sometimes the girls learned to write their name, but most of the time they had too many domestic duties to perform and they never had too much time for learning. Most of the time I was here, I lived in part of that schoolhouse. I never owned any horses, but I did own a cow valued at $9 in 1848. I paid a county tax of $1.25, and I had a state tax of 3 cents that year. Sounds pretty good. But I only made $16 to $18 a year. Needless to say, with 14 mouths to feed, I needed to do other things. I was an active member in Himmel's Lutheran congregation, and I served as church organist and played the great pipe organ with the wooden pipes built by Conrad Deffenbach. Sometimes my kids had to pump the big bellows, but if for some reason they couldn't, I'd get some of my students to do it on Sunday morning. I was also the chorister and the lead singer for the choir. You know, kind of like Judy Updegrove does today. By the way, tell her to stop by later on. I can probably give her a few pointers. But after doing all that, I still couldn't bring home the bacon. Because I had mathematical training, when I lived with my grandmother in Philadelphia, I started to do surveying work. Fathers were always trying to find land for their sons to start farming, and I knew I could plot and draw droughts to scale. Since I was one of the few people who knew both English and German in the area, I could be helpful to many people. I soon became a respected and honored member of the community. And in 1842, I was chosen and elected by caucus to for a term of 5 years as Justice of the Peace of Upper Mockinoy Township. I received my commission from Governor Porter on April 12th of that year, and I provided the $1,000 in bond on May 5th, co-signed by Michael Wright and John Kiefer. I was elected for a second term in 1847 and a third term in 1852, with commissions coming from Governor Chunk and Bigler respectively. In 1857, I was elected as Justice of the Peace of newly formed Washington Township. I only served 2 years of that term before my death. During those days, the Justice of the Peace handled disputes between neighbors, they wrote wills, they settled estates, they wrote deeds, and they transferred real estate. They tell me my broad experience of human nature and local conditions retained the respect of the people and maintained the dignity of the community. But perhaps I'm more well known as a printer than anything else. I was already operating my printing press before I left Greenstown, and I was one of the few independent press owners at that time. Most of my imprints were of a religious nature. I printed Himmel briefe, such as you see here. Okay, some of the things I have in the front. Okay, they were known as letters from heaven. I also printed duties of school children to their teacher and to their parents. Perhaps I should get a copy, as I understand children and parents just don't do their homework nowadays. Should probably use a copy of that, huh? On December 1st, 1830, I printed a broadside of school prayers to be said before and after school. In March of 1831, I printed another broadside of morning and evening prayers as well as other verses. Another broadside was entitled George Washington, with an eagle woodcut with his outspread wings and data about Washington's life. In 1837 and 38, I printed Christmas hymns in verse form. I also did a hymn for my Sunday school students. In 1847 and 48, I printed New Year's greetings and passed them out to my students. But of greatest value to students and church members were my confirmation certificates, like the copy you see here. Upon completion of catechetical class, instruction, and First Communion, my colleagues awarded these to students. They were usually about 7.5 by 6 inches in size, and they always had a religious verse in place for the pastors to sign their name, like Reverend Hampton, Reverend Dinger, Isaac Steele, and J.P. Schindel were some of the ministers who used these certificates. My sons Timothy and Marcus helped me with the printing until my death on July 2nd, 1859. I usually included a statement on my broadsides, which were always in German. Gedruckt und der Himmelskirche by Peter Montiel.